November 24th, 1971. Portland, Oregon. A man in a dark suit and tie carrying a briefcase buys a one-way ticket to Seattle under the name Dan Cooper. He boards Northwest Orient Airlines, Flight 305, a routine 30-minute hop. He is calm. He is polite. He orders a bourbon and soda. Then, he hands a note to a flight attendant. It says he has a bomb in his briefcase. He wants $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. Or he will blow everyone on the plane to pieces. What happens next will become the most audacious, baffling, and enduring unsolved crime in American history. Not because of its violence, but because of its perfection. A man stepped onto a plane and then, quite literally, stepped out of the world. This is not a story about a hijacker. It is a story about a vanishing act so clean, so absolute, it broke the logic of investigation itself. It is the story of a man who didn't just steal money. He stole his own identity from the future, leaving behind only a legend and a question that echoes through the decades. How do you solve a crime when the criminal erases the crime scene from the map? To understand the sheer gall of D.B. Cooper, you have to understand the skies of the early 1970s. This was the golden age of hijacking. In just 3 years, there were over 130 hijackings in U.S. airspace. Most were desperate attempts to get to Cuba. They were chaotic, emotional, and almost always ended in negotiation or disaster. A protocol had been established. Comply, get the plane on the ground, negotiate, give the hijacker what he wants, and let the FBI snipers pick him off when he tries to escape. Cooper studied this playbook, and then he ripped it to shreds. He wasn't going to Cuba. He wasn't making a political statement. He wasn't surrendering on a tarmac. He wrote an entirely new script. After takeoff, Cooper showed a flight attendant the wires and red sticks in his briefcase. The threat was credible. The pilot radioed ahead. In Seattle, while the other 36 passengers were released, authorities scrambled. They gathered the cash, $200,000 in $20 bills, all serial numbers recorded. They provided the parachutes, 2 military-grade backpacks, 2 emergency chest packs, precisely as requested. Cooper inspected the money and the chutes with the detached air of a quality control manager. He kept the civilian backpacks for himself, a detail investigators would later obsess over. He refueled the plane, gave the crew new flight instructions, and released the last of the flight attendants. Then, with just the cockpit crew aboard a Boeing 727, Dan Cooper closed the curtain to the passenger cabin. He ordered the pilots to fly south towards Mexico at a slow speed of 170 knots, with the landing gear down and the wing flaps at 15 degrees. He told them to keep the cabin at a lower pressure and to fly no higher than 10,000 feet. These were not the demands of a panicked amateur. They were the exact technical specifications for a low-altitude, slow-speed jump from the aft air stair of a 727, a little-known feature of the aircraft that could be lowered in flight. How did he know this? Who was this man? At 8:13 p.m., somewhere over the dense, stormy forests of southwestern Washington, a warning light flashed in the cockpit. It indicated a change in air pressure. Someone had opened the rear door. The crew felt a sudden jolt, a slight upward lift of the plane's nose. When they landed in Reno, Cooper was gone. The aft stair was down. The parachutes were gone. So was the money. All that remained in the cabin was Cooper's clip-on tie, a tie pin, and 8 cigarette butts. The man had evaporated into the night rain over some of the most rugged, impenetrable wilderness in America. The FBI's Seattle office launched what would become one of the longest and most exhaustive investigations in its history, codenamed NORJAC, Northwest Hijacking. The scale was monumental, born of pure frustration. They had a suspect who was now a ghost. So they turned the entire Pacific Northwest into a crime scene. The ground search. For weeks, hundreds of FBI agents, military personnel, and civilian volunteers combed the projected drop zone. They searched on foot, on horseback, in helicopters. They found nothing. No parachute, no body, no briefcase, no distinctive suit. The money hunt. The serial numbers of the 10,000 bills were distributed to banks worldwide. The FBI waited for years for a single bill to surface. It was a financial tripwire that stretched across the globe. Silence. The suspect avalanche. The FBI compiled a list of over 800 viable suspects. They ranged from a disillusioned aerospace engineer with parachuting experience, to a troubled paratrooper, to a random Oregon man who shared the name D.B. Cooper, a press misreport that stuck. Each was investigated, alibied, and eliminated. The case files would eventually weigh over 60 pounds. The forensic void. The physical evidence was a cruel joke. The tie yielded no usable DNA. The cigarette butts offered only generic tobacco. The parachutes, if found, would be the holy grail. They never were. The investigation was a masterpiece of modern policing. It was also utterly, completely futile. It was like throwing the world's finest net into the deepest part of the ocean and catching nothing but water. Cooper hadn't just escaped the FBI. He had escaped physics. He had jumped into a freezing rainstorm over mountainous terrain at night in a business suit, possibly with 2 parachutes and 21 pounds of cash. The odds of survival were considered near zero. But if he died, where was the body? If he lived, where was the money? The only logical conclusion was the impossible one. He succeeded. As the investigation stalled, the legend expanded to fill the vacuum. D.B. Cooper wasn't a criminal. He was a folk hero. He was the ultimate anti-establishment figure. The quiet man who outsmarted the system, stole from a corporation, the airline was insured, harmed no one, and vanished. In the disillusioned post-Vietnam, post-Watergate era, he was a Robin Hood for the modern age, a symbol of clean, victimless rebellion. Songs were written, movies were made. Every year on the anniversary, Cooper-themed parties were held in the Pacific Northwest. People proudly claimed to be him or related to him. The FBI was inundated with tips and confessions from attention seekers and the mentally ill, each one wasting thousands of man-hours. The more the FBI failed, the more powerful the myth became. Cooper had achieved something unique. He turned his own unsolved crime into a form of cultural immortality. His legacy wasn't the money, it was the mystery. Speaking of elusive targets and complex searches, let's talk about finding the right elements for your project. You're crafting a documentary about this endless investigation. You need audio that builds suspense, conveys the vast emptiness of the wilderness, and the tedious, frustrating click of bureaucracy. You need the roar of a 727's engines, the static of 1970s radio traffic, the sound of rain on a million leaves. But sourcing that sound without a labyrinth of legal hurdles can feel like its own unsolved case. That's where Epidemic Sound comes in. Consider it your evidence locker for sound, a massive library of high-quality, royalty-free music and sound effects. No need for a warrant, no red tape, just direct access to thousands of tracks, from tense, period-specific synth scores to the immersive sounds of nature and machinery. Need the specific whine of a 727's hydraulic pumps? The ominous thud of an air stair deploying in flight? They've got it. Their search tools help you isolate the precise audio clue. Right now, Epidemic Sound is offering a free trial. Use the link in the description to access the library. Thanks to Epidemic Sound for sponsoring this deep dive into an enduring enigma. Now, back to the only piece of evidence that ever surfaced. In 1980, 8 years after the hijacking, a young boy named Brian Ingram was building a campfire on the banks of the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. He dug into the sand and found 3 bundles of disintegrating, waterlogged $20 bills. The serial numbers matched. It was $5,800 of D.B. Cooper's ransom. This was the break the FBI had waited for, and it broke the case wide open into even more confusion. The money was found far from the calculated drop zone. The conditions suggested it had washed downstream, possibly for years. Did it mean Cooper had landed near the river, buried the cache and died? Did the packet simply break open in the chute and scatter? Or did a surviving Cooper years later panic and try to dump the evidence? The discovery provided a data point, but no vector. It proved the money entered the ecosystem, but not how, or when, or by whom. It deepened the mystery it was supposed to solve. In 2016, after 45 years, the FBI officially suspended active investigation into the D.B. Cooper case. The file remains open, but no one is looking. The conclusion was not a solution, but a surrender to probability. The prevailing theory is now the simplest one they'd long resisted. Cooper did not survive the jump. The FBI's final assessment is that he was likely an inexperienced jumper, possibly a petty criminal with knowledge of aviation, who miscalculated horrifically. He plunged into the freezing, turbulent darkness, his body and loot swallowed by the vast, hungry wilderness of the Lewis River Basin or the Columbia Gorge. The terrain is so rugged, the forest so dense, that it could hide 100 bodies forever. The $5,800 that surfaced was a fluke, a tiny piece of wreckage from a disaster carried miles by water. It is the least romantic answer. It paints Cooper not as a genius, but as a dead fool. And yet, even this answer is unsatisfying. It doesn't feel complete, because in our modern world of satellites, DNA, and digital footprints, the idea that a man can still simply disappear without a trace is more unsettling than any conspiracy. So, who was D.B. Cooper? We will never know. And that is not the point. The revelation of the D.B. Cooper case is not about the man, but about the mirror he held up to the system designed to catch him. It revealed the ultimate limit of investigation, that a single, perfectly executed act of ambiguity can create a mystery so clean it becomes unsolvable, not for lack of effort, but by design. Cooper's genius was not in surviving. He likely didn't. His genius was in engineering a crime that left no second act. He left no accomplices to betray him. He used untraceable demands. He chose a disposal method, the sky, that erased the crime scene. He vanished into an environment so hostile, it would destroy all physical evidence, including himself. He created a closed loop with no loose ends. The FBI's massive 45-year investigation was a monument to 20th century policing. Fingerprints, serial numbers, shoe leather, witness interviews. Cooper's crime was a postmodern puzzle. He didn't leave a trail. He left a void. And you cannot analyze a void. The true legacy of D.B. Cooper is that he proved the system could be defeated not by force, but by ambiguity. He didn't outrun the net. He stepped through a hole that existed only for an instant, a hole created by darkness, weather, and sheer, breathtaking audacity. He is the last ghost of the analog age, a smudge on a photograph, a voice on a cockpit recorder, a name that never was. In a world now saturated with data, his story endures as the final proof that sometimes a person can step off the grid so completely they leave behind only a story. And a story, unlike a man or a body or a bag of money, is impossible to bury.